Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk. This is your host, Tony Cañas, and today I have with me Taylor Horsager. I'm sure that I'm mispronouncing that. Horsager?
That's how those of the family on the West Coast pronounce it. So you're good with that.
What is that? What is the real pronunciation?
Well, the Midwest group, they say Horsager, so it can go both ways.
Horsager. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Taylor Horsager. So today's episode is a career episode, which are my favorite ones, right? So out of 370 episodes, probably 350 have been Insurtech founder interviews, and a few have been career episodes. And basically, I feel like I in all my years in insurance, I have not run into anybody like Taylor before. So super excited for this particular one. So Taylor, first of all, thank you for joining me today. We're recording on a Sunday at 4:15 p.m. Eastern. And I've already kind of talked your ear off for like an hour and a half over the last week before recording. So about random topics. So thank you so much for being here. How's it going?
It's going great. Yeah, we just I live in Salt Lake. We just got our first dusting of snow up in the mountains this weekend. I'm getting the itch to hit the slopes. Pretty excited.
Fantastic. So you've got a really interesting career where it's been like half insurance, half technology, and half aviation. And yeah, I realized that that's three halves, right? I'm not that good at math. So a really kind of random set. So I'd love to for the listeners to hear the story. So you go to school, get a degree in communication and philosophy. And then what happened?
So when I graduated, I, naturally having studied communication and philosophy, I was a little bit unsure about what the next step was going to be.
A little bit unemployed.
Right. Exactly. And that tends to happen. But I was still optimistic about, what I could be ultimately doing with my career. And I had years of experience in the aviation world, having grown up, with my grandfather who had his own airplane. He had me flying by the age of 5, stacked telephone books in the co-pilot seat so I could see over the cockpit out the window. And I've been to EAA's AirVenture for 15 plus years. So aviation was one of those things where I was like really interested in. And I knew that those that kind of made it to the major airlines as pilots ultimately could have a pretty lucrative career. So I kind of started down the path of acquiring my ratings to become a professional airline pilot. And in order to do that, I took a job at a local FBO, which is a fixed base operator in Madison, Wisconsin. So I, graduated UW-Madison and got to stay in the area, which is an amazing area, and started working at this FBO 6 days a week on third shift to start acquiring my hours to get the ratings necessary to become a professional aviator. And I got about, 6 months into that role and started getting a little burnt out because what I was doing, I was a line service technician. And I don't know if when you go flying, you see the people that are kind of like towing planes around and fueling them up and carrying the bags and whatnot. And it's not the most glamorous job, but
in the cold of Madison, Wisconsin,
right,
definitely, even if you're from the area.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it had its days, I'll put it that way, but I learned a lot doing that and got to meet a ton of different people in the aviation industry. But anyways, I got a little bored and reached out to a connection that I had at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who at the time was running the flight simulation lab. And he was teaching a course at the university where he was teaching students kind of basic private pilot ground school stuff and working in conjunction with the flight school that was part of Wisconsin Aviation, the FBO, to do the flight training portion of it. So he said, hey, I'm trying to build out my course so that I can move on to do instrument stuff. I'd love to bring you in and help kind of build the foundations of that course, because it just so happened that's what I was studying for my instrument rating at the time. So we started kind of working on that. And I noticed that he had all of these drones around his lab. And Tony, I know we've kind of gone down the rabbit hole of flight simulation, which in and of itself is a really cool thing.
Mhm.
But the drones, I was like, hey, what is this drone? This is really interesting. And
And that was really new at the time.
it
Like they're
was.
becoming fairly normal now, but
So this was like 2015, 2016. So
so
just kind of
yeah.
when what was section 333 at the time, where it was a really difficult process to be able to fly a drone commercially. And just a few years later, Part 107 came out, where it became much easier for someone to get an RPIC certificate to fly drones for commercial purposes. But so that individual went on to tell me, hey, I'm doing some consulting work for American Family Insurance, and am just working with them in the innovations lab to figure out how drone technology could be applied to the insurance industry. One thing led to another, and it basically turned out that AmFam kind of put the onus of the expansion of the drone program in the flight operations division, which coincidentally had an office 5 hangars down from where I was working at the time. And they have a beautiful, private jet for the business. But so I interviewed there and started up as a consultant, ended up leaving my line technician job behind, and was working for them, helping to explore drone technology and just vetting out the different hardware and software solutions. They ultimately brought me on to help scale the program as the chief drone pilot, where we grew the program to over 70 pilots, $500,000 in drone assets, and we were doing roughly 15,000 flights a year across the 19 states in which we operate. By the time that I kind of moved on to my next position within the company. So I'll pause there. There's more of the story, but I'm sure you might have some questions.
Completely insurance unrelated, but I'm assuming that being a private pilot and better made it super easy to fly drones. Basically, like it's like same concept, just I'm not in the vehicle kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. You would think, and I'll actually walk that back a little bit, because back in the days of Section 333, it was a lot more complex to fly a drone, especially if you're flying a drone in controlled airspace. So in Madison, we had a Class Charlie airport, and American Family's headquarters were within the Class Charlie airspace, the inner kind of ring of the airspace. So in order for us to fly, we had to have a two-way radio that was, where I could talk to the Madison air traffic controllers. We had to have all this paperwork. And so knowing kind of the way the traffic patterns worked and the lingo of ATC was incredibly useful in getting a drone up in the air. But fast forward to Part 107, and Lance, which is the FAA's kind of technology solution for giving drone pilots access to controlled airspace. Once that stuff came along, it became a lot easier to become a drone pilot. And I'll say, even just working at American Family, like almost everyone we trained had no aviation experience. Maybe 1 or 2 people out of the 70 we trained. Many of them were gamers, where they caught on to flying the drone really quickly.
Yeah.
But the reality is that DJI, who's got, the last that I checked, 70% of the global market share of consumer and prosumer drones, they have made it incredibly easy and user-friendly to go from not knowing anything to being able to fly a drone, through their user interface and just kind of like the basic tutorials that they provide. So it's kind of a yes and no answer to your question, I would say.
Okay. So aviation, considered super sexy, lots of fun, expensive, but eventually pays well as a career. You get the opportunity to go work for an insurance company. The exact opposite, right? The perception is the least sexy industry ever. The perception, it's just a very negative perception in general of insurance. So when the opportunity came to work at an insurance company, were you thinking like, no, not really interested, or were you thinking like, whatever, flying's flying, I'll fly for whoever is willing to pay me, or how did that transition go?
Totally. Yeah. I was of the mind, kind of as you described, that insurance is boring. It's this thing that, nobody really likes, and you just have to have it, right? The way that I got kind of looped in, and the way that my opportunity was framed was, hey, you're doing flight training. What we want you to do is fly a private plane to these different locations in the United States and then go fly the drone on behalf of the insurance company, because everything was kind of up in the air at this point.
You
Turned
you
out,
had officially the coolest job in insurance, basically. Anyway, well, no, I have a friend who for a while was a work comp adjuster for the NFL, so maybe that one. But anyway, go ahead.
that does sound like a cool job. Yeah, well, long story short, that didn't end up coming to fruition. I
At
did have
all.
the opportunity to fly a private plane doing some kind of experimental work in my role, where I was doing kind of low level mapping using a Cessna 172 with a sensor attached to it to create orthomosaic maps to, basically look at the devastation of a tornado.
Oh,
But this is
awesome. I mean,
experimental.
also awesome that they're using the technology for that.
Totally. And I think, frankly speaking, I always thought of that experiment that I was running like a manned drone. And coincidentally, one of the largest drone companies in the industry, Drone Base, recently started a program that leverages manned aircraft at low levels to collect data. So there's kind of this continuum, if you will, between drone technology and that type of mapping solution. But ultimately, I never really ended up getting the opportunity that was presented to me. But as soon as I got my foot in the door, I realized that insurance is so much more than just, writing checks and dealing with, difficult claim situations and paying premiums every month. Like, there is a ton in the insurance world that kind of is only exposed to those people that have the opportunity to work in the field or work around the field. And fortunately for myself, I had a unique pathway in that I got put in the aviation division, which is already kind of a unique place to be with a company. Not every insurance company has an aviation division. So I had a ton of flexibility and had the opportunity to speak with everyone from the CEO of the company, who would just be passing through to get on a plane, to the random claim adjuster. So I learned a ton about culture, workflows, kind of goals of the organization, how things operate. And I realized it's a really cool space. And naturally, I kind of come from a background of experimentation and entrepreneurship, even in college. So I never kind of lost that side of myself, and kept kind of trying to push the boundaries with what we were doing with drones, and looking for opportunities to, create efficiencies and make the experience better. And that led me into the innovation team within American Family, which was even cooler because there's like tons of, it's like an ongoing incubator where they're baking up all of these really unique ideas and testing theories and stuff. And once I saw that and how that fit into the context of insurance, it made it even more interesting.
Okay. So one of the things you said during our first conversation was that insurance is fascinating. Again, you come from aviation, like one of the coolest jobs, at least like the perception is that what could possibly be cooler than aviation. So I'm not saying insurance is cooler,
Mm.
but why did you end up finding it fascinating?
Yeah. I don't know if it ended up being just insurance that was the thing that pulled me off of that aviation career path. I think that I had to come to terms with a couple realities that I hadn't been mature enough to recognize at the time when I started down the path. And basically, when I was spending the time training a lot of American Families drone pilots, I was going down to Phoenix because we did our training in the winter every other week for like months at a time. And that got quite exhausting, just doing that much travel and being in hotels for so long. I wasn't sleeping well. And I kind of realized that I connected the dots, if you will, that the lifestyle that I would have been exposed to as a professional pilot maybe wasn't really what I needed. And I also kind of realized that the part of aviation that excited me the most as I was coming up, as I was getting my ratings and doing all of these things, was the new challenges, the new problems that I was being faced with. And that I had this fear that once I got into the cockpit of the Airbus A350, finally, and I was doing flights all the time, that it might ultimately end up feeling a little stagnant because there wasn't this opportunity to solve problems anymore or be exposed to new things. And I think that the thing that really kind of drew me back into the insurance world, and ultimately I reached this point where I had to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't chasing professional aviation anymore, because I was kind of lying to myself for a while. And I was still, doing these
I
things.
just need the hours. Yeah, just need to get
Yeah,
enough hours. This is
I
a
didn't
great
want
way
to
to
let it
get the
go.
hours.
Right, right, exactly. And part of the way in which I was lying to myself was really cool. I was getting to fly a Pilatus PC-12, which is a turbine aircraft that can do a world of different things. But that was a really great experience, and I was doing that kind of on the side when I was the chief drone pilot. And I kept that kind of dream going. But ultimately, I had to come to terms with the fact that I really like sitting at the core of problems and solving problems. And that's what led me into this current role of being a product manager in the Insurtech space. And
So,
yeah.
okay, so like the kind of problems that you solve as a pilot are kind of practical problems. You're not really innovating. You're applying your knowledge of aeronautics in order to make sure that you that you keep yourself and your passengers safe,
Mhm.
basically. But you're not innovating, right? So very, very different from what you can do. So 3 years as the chief pilot at this big carrier in the drone side. You build that department. Why give that up? Like why move on to product?
Well, I think that the short answer is that the organization recognized that the aviation department maybe wasn't the right place for the drone program to live. And since my departure, it's been that department has been almost completely hands off with the program itself. I was kind of a unique individual in that I was able to bridge the gap between the claims team, who is now the owner of the program, and the aviation team. And we did do a lot of really important foundational work to make the program safe. The flight operations manuals, the safety management system, the emergency response plan, all of that stuff was taken from, the cream of the crop flight department and was applied to the drone technology. So the claims team has that as a backbone for their operations, but realistically, like all of the budget, all of the decision making around the way the technology was deployed was made within the claims part of the organization. So it made a ton of sense for them to ultimately take ownership of it. And at the time, I got really curious about better, more efficient ways that we could apply technology, both drones and manned aircraft for aerial mapping. And I put together a business plan and sent it to the chief business development officer. And at the time, he basically said, "Here's $1 million. Go see what you can do." And I was extremely excited for having raised my first $1 million. But based on the nuances of the kind of the internal politics, it ended up working out where I couldn't go use that money because of risk. And I basically, buttoned down and said, okay, what's a more creative way that I could approach the situation? Came back to them with a different kind of angle, different proposal, and they got really excited about it. And it turned out that at the time, they were kind of being asked to carry the burden of a rather expensive research initiative that American Family had engaged with one of the top robotics institutions on to build a proprietary hardware and software solution to leverage drone technology to handle claims in a fully automated way. And that was a bet for them against, how fast the industry was going to evolve. And I don't think they realized it was going to evolve as fast as it did. But the innovation team was essentially being asked, hey, can you take this over and help figure out if we can commercialize this technology, or what we should do with it? And at the time, I was bringing a solution to the table that was like, hey, how can we leverage this kind of decentralized network of adjusters to optimize claims efficiency? So they said, hey, you know what, Taylor, we want you to join our team, innovation team, to help us solve this problem. And that really kind of, spoke to me on multiple levels and made it quite obvious that I needed to kind of leave the chief pilot position behind, which ultimately was never backfilled, and join the innovation team. And they actually had a startup studio, which is kind of a novel concept in the insurance world as well, where they were trying to create wholly owned subsidiary companies from scratch. And it was kind of a perfect storm of opportunities to keep exploring and solving problems.
So you go there for a couple of years, or almost a couple of years, and then you join an Insurtech. So what led to that final step, or final for now step of okay, I'm gonna leave this like 40,000 people company where I have this really cool innovation role, to go to, I don't know, a 60 people company,
Right.
that like radically different environment.
Totally. Yeah. Well, the context is important here. So what we were working on at the innovation group was this concept we ultimately called Inspect AI. And the goal was to take drone data and use machine learning and computer vision to essentially predict claims estimates and payouts, and make it very easy for desk adjusters to review the data that had been collected, kind of validate it, and then pass that information into the enterprise ecosystem to finish their workflows. And this was at the peak of the pandemic. So it was, remote adjusting was kind of a very important top of mind topic for the chief claims officer in our organization. And, that was a very relevant problem at the time. And essentially, we were operating on a very small team. So it was myself, there was a principal who was an extremely talented machine learning scientist and entrepreneur. And then we also had a design researcher and a UX UI designer, and another individual that was kind of helping with strategy. So it was a very small team, right? There's like 5 of us, and we were operating in a bubble inside of the broader innovation ecosystem. And ultimately, startups fail, right? And our situation kind of came to a head, and we weren't able to kind of break through the way that we wanted to. And I saw this coming, and I just really wasn't sure that I wanted to go into the claims part of the organization with this kind of initiative, because once I caught the innovation bug, it was something that I realized that I identified with. And I essentially reached out to my current employer, the CEO, Jim Loveland. He and I had met years back when I was the chief drone pilot, and he was demoing his software to us at the first DJI Airworks conference in San Francisco. And, he basically pulled me aside and said, hey, if you're ever looking for an opportunity, please reach out. So that's what I did. And, I was really excited about the opportunity to join Loveland Innovations, because at the end of the day, I kind of recognized that a lot of the things we were trying to do with Inspect AI they kind of required some of the foundation that Loveland Innovations had built with their imaging product. So it really spoke to me on multiple levels, because I was very interested in the solution that they had created. So the fact that it's a 60-person company didn't really scare me because I'd been involved in entrepreneurship early on, and I dropped out of college temporarily to start a company. So that those things weren't really a factor. It was more so like, is this an interesting problem, and is this relevant given my experience? And that's really the two variables that mattered for me.
Okay. So I noticed that you did a certificate for product with UC Berkeley. So did you do that one in person or was it online? And what was that experience like? Because product is something that a lot of people in the industry are interested in. And lately I'm seeing people jump into the product manager certificates at Google and the analytics certificates at Google, but you're the first one that I run into with this particular one. So what was that like?
Yeah, it was a great program, not only for the content, but also the networking. So it was totally virtual. We met like once or twice a week, and it was kind of broken out into pods, which was very reflective of a lot of product management team structures, where we just work through the syllabus and then have the opportunity to come together once a week to discuss as a broader team. It was cool because they had a lot of in-house lecturers that had relevant experience in the workforce, but they also brought in people from organizations, either through the video content that they provided or live, to talk about their experience as it pertained to the subject matter that we were learning about. And for that particular program, I would say that what it really did for me was to give me more tools in my toolkit of product management. It's very similar to design thinking in that there's a lot of frameworks that can be useful and applied to your job in certain circumstances. And the PM Studio gave me those frameworks. But I think you'll hear this from other product people, like no PM role is the same, right? Like when you go from one organization to another, you might be doing different things, have different scope. So the fact that I had the opportunity to get this toolkit was really useful, just because I could apply it as I need to in this current role. And that course was cool because they give you indefinite access to the content. So years go by, you're like, hey, what was that thing that we were weighted scoring thing that we were talking about? You can go back and kind of refresh yourself on it. So it was a great course and affordable, I would say. And it came from an accredited, relevant institution. So
UC Berkeley, with a world-class institution. I used to live in Berkeley. Gotcha. I'm not an alum I would have never gotten into UC Berkeley, but I lived in Berkeley. Wonderful school. Met a bunch of Berkeley people.
Nice.
Awesome. So what do you want to do next?
Oh man.
What else would you like to explore in this nebulous world of insurance, Insurtech, and aviation, and the intersection they're in?
Totally. Yeah. I think that one area of particular interest is autonomy, and like autonomous robots, realistically. Drones are kind of autonomous. We use the word autonomy in the drone industry, but like realistically, there's not a lot of AI, pure AI thing going on, where they're learning as they go and figuring things out. And there's a ton of ways in which autonomy can be applied in really useful contexts, such as, trucking, the trucking industry, for instance, right? Where supply chain shortages have bubbled up over the pandemic. And just think about how autonomous trucking could improve safety. And all of that does ultimately tie back to insurance. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting companies and startups that are exploring the autonomy space that I would love to kind of continue applying my experience with drone technology and just software in general towards. But more specifically in the Insurtech space, I think that the intersection of claims triage is super interesting. And I don't know exactly what organization or suite of organizations are working on to solve this problem. I've come across bits and pieces. Like I know Canopy Weather is one that's applying some really interesting technology. These guys have a meteorology background, same as the founder of Opterix, which coincidentally was one of the companies that came out of American Family's startup studio. But where they're taking meteorology and they're figuring out, all right, how can we leverage artificial intelligence to predict risk, and probabilities after a weather event takes place, and say, okay, is this policy perfectly okay, or is this, is this probably a total loss given the parameters that input parameters that we have to work with? And I think that there's much more to it than that, right? There's like the prediction up front about what happened or what could happen based on weather events for property, at least. Then there's the validation aspect of it, which is like the imaging, the way that satellite, manned aircraft, and drone data or cell phone data is leveraged to basically tie these worlds together. And this broader kind of claims triage thing, I ultimately see this going in a direction where it's a series of linked automated processes, where today we've got, we went from someone shows up on site who's got a clipboard with, what are those pieces of paper that you write on and then it kind of impresses the ink on the next page?
Carbon copy.
Carbon copy, yeah, carbon copies and Polaroid cameras, all the way to like, these robust applications that are leveraging AI on the edge. And I think that the continuation of that development is just going to keep growing, where there will always be, at the very least, a human on the loop. So someone monitoring these processes, but whether a human always has to be in the loop is something that I think we're going to really start to question in the coming years. And I think that general space in Insurtech is incredibly interesting. And we've seen companies coming up, approaching this problem from multiple angles, where, some startups such as, what is the name? Flywheel, where they've started focusing on capturing data on the interior of the property and using AI to figure out contents and dimensions. And then you've got companies like ours, Imaging, where we're focused on leveraging drones to collect data on the exterior. And then, you've got innovations coming up, like I mentioned, in the weather analytics space and so on. And you can kind of see how all of this stuff ultimately is going to come together in, either one solution or a series of connected solutions to create a much more dynamic and fluid claims handling ecosystem. And I think that space in general is just really interesting and exciting.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. That's all I got for now, and get you out in time to, dinner and stuff. Thank you so much for your time. Super, super, super interesting. I love the passion that you've developed for the space. It's a little bit different from my space of insurance careers, but it's the same level of like just complete nerding out over the possibilities. And I absolutely love seeing that in insurance. We desperately need more of that. So thank you so much. Look forward to continue seeing you do cool stuff in the industry. And thank you so much for coming on the show. I bet you this is going to be the most unique career episode, or rather, I bet you that for a lot of the younger listeners, they're going to be like, holy crap, I had no idea roles like that were available within insurance. What a crazy, awesome career. So thank you, Taylor.
Totally. Thank you. Really appreciate it. It's been fun.